A student came to spend a holiday with her family, went for a run, and vanished from sight. The small village's residents were shocked by this incident because it was unlike anything that had ever occurred there. Detectives launched a lengthy investigation, and it was not until 28 years later that the horrifying truth that stunned the villagers was revealed to everyone. On April 16, 1971, Mandy Stabick was born in Bellingham, Washington, an American city. She was raised in a big family with two brothers, a sister, and devoted parents. Mandy's parents made the decision to relocate to Palmer, Alaska, not long after Mandy was born. This area was well known for its safety, peaceful surroundings, and cohesive community of a few thousand people. After a number of years in this town, Mandy's parents decided to get a divorce when she was 3 years old, and she moved in with her mother. She still saw her father practically every day, though. A horrible tragedy befell their family a year later. Mandy's 17-year-old brother vanished while out hunting. His body was discovered by the police later, with nearly 20 bullet wounds. The investigators searched for suspects in vain, failing to identify any. Although this incident was quite shocking for Mandy's family, she went on to have a happy and active childhood. She was an accomplished student, an avid athlete, and a multi-instrumentalist. When Mandy was 12 years old, her mother made the decision to return to Washington, but this time to a small village called Acton, where there were only about 300 residents at the time who were all acquainted. The woman concluded that she and her 3 children would be better off in this place because there were hardly any significant crimes committed there. After enrolling in the neighborhood school, Mandy made friends fast, kept up her athletic career, joined the school band, and started cheerleading. She also cherished the surrounding natural surroundings and delighted in running toward the scenic river. Mandy's family experienced another tragedy when she was 17 years old. Following the divorce, her father continued to reside in Palmer, where he raised a new family with multiple children. Tragically, Mandy's stepbrother perished in a river in 1988. It brought back memories of her older brother's passing and was another setback for her. 3 hours away from home, Mandy attended Central Washington University in 1989 after graduating from high school. She worked hard to earn straight A's because she wanted to be a pilot. Despite living in a dorm, she made time to visit her family whenever she could. She returned home at the end of November with the intention of staying for a few more days to celebrate Thanksgiving with her family. The day following the holiday, November 24, Mandy made the decision to go for a run. Normally, her mother would go with her and ride her bike beside her, but this time, her sister had come for a quick visit. So Mandy went off by herself and brought the family's German Shepherd along. Her typical route took her from her house, down the road to the river, and back again, covering a distance of roughly 5 kilometers. The run typically took less than an hour, but Mandy was obviously running late this time. When her brother returned home, he was surprised to find Mandy still absent. While visiting a friend whose house was down the road, the brother watched Mandy run back towards her house. However, a short while later, she ran in the opposite direction. He assumed that she had chosen to complete another lap, but even so, she ought to have arrived home much sooner than he did. As time went on, Mandy's family started to have serious concerns about her. Not only had she never run for so long, but she also had something special planned for the evening. She invited her fellow roommate to come with her before leaving for the holiday. That day, they intended to meet up with friends in a nearby town. Something occurred 2 hours later that increased the family's level of anxiety. It was very strange that their German Shepherd had returned home without Mandy. When a young woman who had already lost a child made the decision to call the police right away, the sheriff agreed to begin the search even though Mandy was only 18 years old. In the meantime, the mother started phoning each and every villager to inquire as to whether they had seen her daughter. Many of them went out into the street and promptly organized their own search after learning that Mandy had vanished. Along with the young woman's family, they strolled the route she had run on multiple occasions, but to no avail. In the meantime, Mandy's acquaintances were being questioned by the police. It was revealed to them that the young lady had been dating Rick since high school. The mother of the young lady also mentioned that the couple had broken up and then reconciled. While searching the area with the villagers, The investigators spoke with him and found no reason to suspect the young man. They also questioned a number of other people. By then, the search had included individuals riding horses, SUVs, and helicopters. The local dog handler even attempted to work with a shepherd dog in the hopes that it would lead them to Mandy. However, the dog was clearly terrified and refused to leave the porch of its home. Despite searching until late at night, no results were found. It persisted the following day, and the authorities were able to track down the first concerning hint. On one of the side roads, volunteers discovered women's sports bands. They had multiple holes, an aged appearance, and were coated in mud. Mandy's mother was shown the pants right away, but she was hesitant to admit that her daughter was the owner. The police nevertheless sent them to the laboratory in spite of this. On them, experts discovered remnants of male semen. Detectives requested DNA samples from every man who knew Mandy and was in the vicinity right away, but they were unable to find any matches. Investigators were unable to use this clue because the FBI's general database, which contains the DNA of convicted criminals, had not yet been established that year. Meanwhile, searchers using search dogs started to take part in the hunt, and they quickly found a fresh lead. They were able to locate the young woman's footprints and her sheepdog's tracks on the unpaved road, but there was an odd moment when their tracks came to a stop at the same spot. There was only one conclusion that made sense. Mandy had to have entered a car. Experts refute the detective's assumption that she was kidnapped and forced into a car, saying that if the young woman had resisted, the scene at the end of the tracks would have been different. Since it appeared as though she got into the car on her own initiative, it is possible that she knows the driver. Police and firefighters started looking for the young woman in the nearby river that flowed alongside the road where she was last seen on the third day of the search. They discovered something unsettling there. They saw a female body in the water approximately 5 kilometers downstream from the village. After retrieving it, they realized it was Mandy because she was naked except for her socks and sneakers. Other than a few large scratches on her legs, the police did not observe any significant injuries. They started to hypothesize that the young woman might have drowned in relation to this, but this explanation made no sense. First of all, Mandy could not have willingly entered the river, especially since she was naked, because it was the end of November and the water was extremely cold. Additionally, the young woman could have stood there safely because the river's depth was much lower than human height. After examining the victim's body, medical professionals discovered a head injury that was most likely brought on by a powerful blow. They did, however, conclude that this injury was not the cause of death. The experts ultimately came to the conclusion that the young woman drowned in the water due to suffocation. Alternatively put, she drowned. The medical professionals also discovered evidence of the victim's abuse, extracted biological material from the offender, and discovered male DNA under the victim's fingernails. The police came up with the most plausible explanation of what transpired based on all of this. Mandy was abducted on the road, hauled into a car, and driven to a river, where she was violently attacked by an unidentified assailant. The young woman then made her way out, as seen by the scratches on her legs, which were probably from the prickly plants that were growing along the riverbank. Mandy was eventually approached by the criminal, who struck her in the head and threw her into the water. Forensic specialists discovered a DNA profile and cross-referenced it with samples from all parties involved in the case. Over 30 men were checked in total, but no matches were discovered. Aside from Mandy's brother, police questioned every person living in the village and its environs in an effort to find any leads. On the day of her disappearance, a resident of Agam noticed her. The man saw the young woman running along the road from his car. A dark pickup truck passed at that exact moment, just as she was out of sight. Although the man did not think much of it, he did report his observation to the police following Mandy's murder. He was unable to recall the pickup truck's model and declined to give detectives a sample of his DNA. They got a court order to force the man to provide his DNA because they think this behavior is suspicious. It did not, however, match the sample that was discovered on the victim's body. The murder was widely reported in the media, and during the first few months, the police received thousands of tips. Sadly, they were all dead ends, and as a result, the investigation took years to complete. Detectives continued to actively consider a number of candidates, but they were unable to identify any serious suspects. Investigators once conjectured that the crime may have been committed by the Green River Killer, an unidentified serial killer. He was thought to have killed several young women and frequently disposed of their bodies in rivers. Nevertheless, no proof supporting this version was discovered. The murderer was never connected to Mandy's death, even after he was apprehended and his identity revealed. The case was closed after new suspects and insufficient evidence were discovered. For many years, investigators took it out of the archives on occasion in an attempt to come up with some new concepts, but they were unsuccessful. 20 years after Mandy's passing, in 2009, the local police department reopened the investigation thanks to a new detective. He chose to adopt a different strategy because in the last 20 years, no new evidence had surfaced. He and his associates went around the village and its environs, requesting that each male resident submit a sample of their DNA. The detective had a very easy plan. He realized that Mandy's killer was probably a local, and that if they took DNA samples from every man in the area, they would have a good chance of identifying the murderer. This task appeared fairly simple, given that the village and its environs were home to only a few hundred men. However, in reality, it proved to be far more challenging. The police searched every man for a full 4 years, but they were unable to find a single match. The detectives started searching through archives in an attempt to find every man who was a resident of the area in 1989, after realizing that the murderer might have moved or even passed away in the 20 years that had passed since the murder. The police got an unexpected lead in 2013. 2 women and their kids visited a water park. They were born and raised in the same village as Mandy. They started talking about the notorious murder as they were chatting. One of the women mentioned at one point that she thought she knew who might have killed Mandy. The other person responded that she too had suspicions about a particular individual, and they both gave the same name. He was only a few houses away from the victim and was 21 years old at the time of the murder. The women were taken aback to discover that they had been suspecting the same person all along. But what was even more intriguing were the reasons behind their conviction that Timothy was the culprit. When they were teenagers, one of the women claimed that Timothy had made advances on her. He had once started to aggressively pursue her and make advances while she was in a car with Timothy and a few other friends. After the other friends stepped in, the woman developed a severe fear of being around this person. The account of the second woman was even more startling. One evening, several years after Mandy's murder, Timothy knocked on her door while her husband was at work. At that point, the woman was already living with her husband and their newborn child. His visit did not surprise the woman because he was friends with her husband. The woman let Timothy in after he explained that he had been passing by after hunting and needed to use the phone. But then Timothy began acting strangely. He put the phone down after standing there for a while without making the call. He then started telling her that he had been crushing on her for a long time and made the offer to have sex. Timothy persisted in his aggressive insistence, even though she refused and demanded that he leave. He did not leave their house until the woman threatened to call the police. After exchanging these tales, they made the decision to discuss their concerns about Timothy with the police. The women said they were not positive if he was involved in the murder when asked why they waited for so long. They would never get away with accusing an innocent person of murder in a place like this. Thus, none of them had the courage to share this information. Detectives noticed something intriguing about this person right away, which piqued their interest. It was extremely odd that none of their colleagues spoke with Timothy or requested a DNA sample from him during the initial investigation. Despite knowing the victim, living close by, and having his house next to the road the young woman ran on, the young man did not show up in previous police reports. After more investigation, detectives discovered that Mandy was buddies with Tom, his younger brother. The fact that Timothy relocated to a different city less than 2 months after the murder raises additional red flags. Maybe this is the reason he eluded the authorities. They had a ton of leads at the time, and they were checking the people who willingly helped them out. Timothy moved to Emerson, a town 40 kilometers away from his previous residence. He got married soon before moving, and the two eventually had 3 kids. Examining his criminal past, investigators discovered another troubling detail. The police received a statement from his wife in 2010 alleging that Timothy had physically assaulted her and their kids. But one minor detail in the statement caught the investigators off guard. His wife explained why Timothy posed a risk to their family in it. She mentioned her husband's odd behavior in passing while watching documentaries on crime and domestic abuse. Timothy frequently chastised criminals for how poorly they commit murders and leave so much evidence behind when they watched similar programs together. The man also enjoyed boasting that he would never commit the same errors and would have escaped detection. The investigators started to give his involvement in Mandy's murder some serious thought after reviewing all of this data. The most intriguing part started when they went to his house to ask a number of questions and request a voluntary DNA sample. Timothy asserted that he could not recall the crime or even the identity of Mandy Stavik. Detectives began to question his statement right away. First of all, the village's population of less than 300 people was acquainted with one another. Second, it was inconceivable that Timothy did not know the Stavik family given that they lived a short distance apart. Furthermore, this case garnered discussion not only in the village but in all nearby towns following the murder. It was the first crime of that kind to occur in the area in a long time, and for several months afterward, locals' top conversational topic was this one. Detectives were not in a rush to accept the man's statements, so they asked him to give a DNA sample. Timothy declined, which increased their level of suspicion. Regretfully, investigators are unable to secure a court order compelling the man to provide his DNA because they have no evidence at all that would connect him to the murder. Following that, they made the decision to take a different route. After learning that Timothy had spent many years working as a courier for a nearby bakery, the detectives went to speak with the manager and requested that she give them details about Timothy's routes going forward. The man may have left his DNA on an object, so the police intend to track him down and retrieve it. The detectives merely stated that an investigation was being conducted and did not disclose to the manager the specific crime for which their employee was being investigated. However, the woman declined to divulge this information in the absence of authorization from upper management. When the police got in touch with them, they requested a court order, which put the investigators back in a dead end. They kept reading Timothy's biography in an effort to uncover fresh information that would help them get the crucial court ruling, but their efforts proved fruitless, and the case languished for a number of more years. When the police returned to his home in 2015, they questioned him briefly and asked for a sample of his DNA, but he once again refused. That went on until 2017, when an unforeseen event occurred. A lady named Kim Wagner, a bakery manager, went out to a bar with her spouse and friends. The group of people were all from Acton and were roughly the same age as Mandy at the time of her murder. They eventually got to discussing the case, which had plagued the community for many years. Kim realized when one of the friends brought up Timothy Bass, who lived close to the victim's house. Kim did not even consider it possible that his whereabouts had anything to do with the murder of Mandy Stavik when the police showed up at her place of employment and asked for information. Nevertheless, she soon began to suspect that her co-worker was the murderer. She carried this thought around in her mind for a while. Detectives eventually returned to her place of employment in the hopes that she had changed her mind since their initial chat, and their suspicions were validated. When Kim asked the investigators directly if they thought Timothy killed Mandy, the police were taken aback but did not refute it. Kim then invited the investigators to her office. The woman then gave them all the information they needed along with some fascinating insights about her colleague. She had known the man for a long time and had always thought he was weird. She made the decision to assist the investigators after learning from a friend that Bass had resided close to Mandy's residence during those years and started to think carefully about his potential involvement in the case. When the detective began tracking Timothy, new challenges surfaced because he consistently wore gloves to work, making it impossible for experts to collect a DNA sample from items he handled. Additionally, the man did not smoke, so the police were unable to even get his saliva on a cigarette butt. Since Bass's only job at the bakery was product delivery, he did not even have an office. Furthermore, an additional peculiar fact made the investigators' job more difficult. Timothy never disposed of his trash at work. He took it home and put it in his van. The detectives knew right away that this kind of behavior could not be accidental. Timothy reportedly realized that the police suspected him of killing Mandy, so he began to take precautions to ensure that they did not find any evidence of his DNA. But in the end, the investigators were fortunate. Kim said she would help when she learned they could not get the suspect's biological material. Because of the way laws are written, police officers are not permitted to ask people to get evidence on their behalf. Even if it is clear that the suspect is guilty in this situation, the evidence will not be allowed in court. However, the investigators have the right to accept and use any evidence that someone voluntarily turns over to them. As a result, Kim offered to collect some DNA samples from Bass while the investigators stood by. The woman took a long time to accomplish her goal because the suspect was very cautious. She did not see the man drinking from a plastic cup and tossing it in the trash with the can until 3 months had passed. She took both pieces of evidence and gave them to the police after waiting for Timothy to leave. They forwarded the can containing the count right away to the lab, where professionals took a DNA profile. It matched Mandy's body's biological makeup exactly. The police went after the man right away and took him into custody after they finally received the eagerly anticipated evidence. The suspect was eventually charged 28 years after the murder. Timothy initially denied his guilt during questioning, but that changed when the investigators revealed the DNA sample match. At this, the man instantly began to tell a different story, claiming that he had an affair with Mandy. They allegedly began dating many months prior to her death and were forced to keep it a secret from everyone since she was in a relationship. Timothy claims that during her job on the day of her passing, Mandy stopped by his house. After sharing a private moment, she departed. He went on to say that although his father was at home at the time, he had long since passed away, making it impossible to use him as a witness. The detectives were momentarily skeptical of this account. To explain why his DNA was found on the victim's body, they believed that Timothy had concocted the entire tale of the covered affair. Additionally, he cited his late father as evidence for his remarks, who was unable to dispute this information. When Mandy's friends and family were questioned by investigators, they all expressed total confidence that the young woman would never date Timothy. He avoided social interactions, was a recluse, and spent most of his time by himself. The detectives made the decision to talk to Timothy's spouse. They were still married even though the woman had made statements against her husband and did not live together. The cops were waiting for another twist in this story. Abruptly, the woman revealed that she and Timothy had spent the entire day at his house on the day of Mandy's murder. Although the detectives did not buy her story, her remarks could cause problems for the court. However, they ran counter to Timothy's account. He claims that Mandy visited his house on the day of the murder and had an intimate relationship with him. When the trial started in May 2019, Timothy's attorney persisted in arguing that his client was innocent and that the victim's body had his DNA because of an intimate, consensual contact. On the other hand, the prosecution maintained that this version was not supported by any evidence. None of the witnesses saw Timothy and Mandy together, and he never gave her a call or sent her any letters. Bass was much more likely to have been obsessed with the young woman and to have had a one-sided crush on her. When Mandy joined the school team, the guy began going to all the sporting events, according to what the investigators discovered. He was completely uninterested in sports prior to that. Furthermore, he could observe the young lady while she ran because his windows overlooked the road where she was running. Apparently, he made the decision to speak with her that day and managed to catch up with her. It is possible that the man began to harass Mandy, but she resisted, or he convinced her to get into his car. Later, under some false pretense, Bass led her to a desolate location, attacked her, and the young lady was able to flee. The man pursued her up to the riverbank, struck her in the head with a stick, and threw her body into the water. By the time Timothy's wife gave her testimony in court, she had already filed for divorce, and once more she took the world by surprise. Rather than remaining true to her first account, the woman told a new one. She claimed she could not recall being at Timothy's house the day of the murder. The woman went on to say that Bass forced her to lie to the police during the first interrogation because he could face jail time at the time. She consented to lie to the police because she had a genuine fear that her husband would hurt her or their children. As a result, the suspect lost his one and only alibi, but the court also learned other fascinating information. Tom, Timothy's younger brother, said that after being asked for a DNA sample, Timothy became extremely nervous. Tom inquired about the situation, and his brother repeated the story of having a covered relationship with the victim. Additionally, Timothy asked Tom to confess to the police that he had a sexual relationship with Mandy, but Tom would not lie. When Timothy's mother visited him in jail and he gave her a note requesting her to tell the police that they had gone to the store together the day of the murder to buy Christmas gifts, she refused and testified against him. Timothy also asked her to testify against his own father and try to persuade investigators that he was the true murderer. After all of this, the defendant's attorney attempted to persuade the jury that Timothy's DNA sample had been obtained illegally. He maintained that the civilian had been asked by the police to get the man's biological material in violation of the law. Kim Widener, however, denied these allegations and stated that she had given the police her assistance. This murder had shaken her deeply in 1989, and she thought about it often for decades after. When she discovered that her co-worker was a suspect, she became determined to crack the case. Kim could not imagine how Mandy's mother felt during those years, especially since she already had a daughter by then. Following a protracted trial spanning several weeks, the jury found Timothy Bass guilty of murder after considering all the evidence. He received a sentence of 27 years in prison, with the option to be released early after 24 years. At the time, Mandy's mother, who was 83, expressed gratitude to the detectives for their work. She was happy that the guilty party had been punished even though she had lost 2 children in her life. Mandy's family created a scholarship in her honor at the high school she attended in 1990. They still support this program today, giving yearly awards to the best music studying students. $25,000, gathered by the people of Acme and neighboring towns, served as the foundation for this scholarship. This money was first offered as a reward for information, but it was decided to incorporate it into the program once the case was solved.
On September 12, 1988, Lawrence, Massachusetts, was rocked to its core by a tragic event. The lifeless body of an 11-year-old girl named Melissa Tremblay was discovered brutally stabbed to death and abandoned on the train tracks near the Boston and Maine railway yard. This senseless act of violence left the community in a state of shock, anger, and profound sadness. The question on everyone's mind was, who could commit such a heinous act? The search for justice would span 35 years before the perpetrator was finally apprehended. Nestled along the picturesque banks of the Merrimack River, Lawrence is a vibrant and thriving city that seamlessly blends small-town charm with the excitement of a bustling metropolis. The heartbeat of the city is fueled by its diverse and passionate residents, whose unwavering pride and love for their community can be felt in every corner. As you stroll through the bustling streets of Lawrence, a palpable sense of history and heritage permeates the air, as if the very bricks and stones whisper tales of the past. Lawrence holds a significant place in American labor history, as it was here that the historic Bread and Roses strike of 1912 unfolded, marking a turning point in the fight for workers' rights and social justice. However, amidst this rich tapestry of history, tragedy struck in 1988. Melissa Tremblay, born in 1977 to her mother Janet Tremblay in Salem, Massachusetts, fell victim to a horrific crime. Raised by her single mother, Janet, Melissa, affectionately known as Missy, attended Lancaster School and was adored by her peers. Described as a carefree, fun-loving, and compassionate little girl, she had a wide circle of friends and always brought joy to those around her. Melissa's favorite playground was the Boston and Maine railway yard, where she would spend countless hours running and playing amidst the train tracks, while her mother visited friends at a nearby social club. Tragically, it was in this very place that her life was cut short, forever altering the lives of those who loved her. On September 11, 1988, Melissa accompanied her mother and her boyfriend to the La Salle Social Club in Lawrence, not far from the railway. While the adults stayed inside, Melissa went outside to play. The last sightings of her alive were reported by a railroad employee and a pizza delivery driver who were in the vicinity during the late afternoon hours of that day. When Janet realized her daughter was missing, she frantically searched the area before reporting her disappearance to the police at around 9 p.m. that night. Janet returned home in a state of panic, desperately hoping for news of her daughter's safety. Tragically, she would never receive such news. On the morning of September 12, 1988, Melissa's lifeless body was discovered in the Old Boston and Main Railway Yard in Lawrence. She had been brutally stabbed to death, and her leg was amputated post-mortem when a train ran over her body. Detectives theorized that the killer had intentionally mutilated the body in an attempt to remove any potential physical evidence. The state police and Lawrence police launched an extensive investigation into Melissa's murder, thoroughly searching the railroad yard and other locations, including the Lancaster Grammar School, where Melissa was a student. The community was shocked and devastated by the heinous crime that had occurred in their small town. Leading the case was Lawrence police officer, Detective Thomas Murphy, who was appalled by the brutality of the murder. Determined to bring justice for Melissa, Detective Murphy and his team collected physical evidence from the crime scene and the victim's body, although the specific nature of this evidence was never disclosed. However, the forensic team analyzing the body did determine that the stab wounds indicated the killer was left-handed. Since no arrests were made at the time, it is presumed that the evidence collected was not viable for the investigation, leading to its shelving until forensic technology advanced enough to utilize it. The police interviewed numerous witnesses, suspects, and persons of interest, but the only lead they discovered was a suspicious-looking van in the vicinity of Melissa's location on the day of her murder. Unfortunately, further inquiries failed to yield any information about the van or its owner. Despite their exhaustive efforts, the police were unable to apprehend Melissa's killer, leaving the community in fear while her family and friends mourned their devastating loss. As time passed, no new leads emerged, and the case remained unsolved, eventually growing cold. However, in 2014, authorities decided to re-examine the cold case, led by Lieutenant Peter Sherver. After reviewing the old case files and the evidence left behind from the initial investigation, the detectives knew they had to take action. Several years later, the evidence recovered from Melissa's body was submitted for testing, and in 2022, after 33 years, the detectives finally had a suspect. On April 26, 2022, Marvin McClendon Jr., a 74-year-old former Massachusetts corrections officer, was arrested in his home in Bremen, Alabama by the Alabama State Police for Melissa's murder. Although the specific details of the evidence used to establish his guilt were not disclosed to the public, the press release did mention that the evidence recovered from the body played a crucial role in identifying him as a suspect. As detectives delved deeper into McClendon's life, a series of incriminating details came to light. McClendon, a former employee of the Massachusetts Department of Corrections, was not working for the state in 1988. He had worked for the department on 3 separate occasions between 1970 and 2002. However, during the time of the murder, he was involved in carpentry work in Chelmsford, a locality near Lawrence. Investigators discovered that McClendon had several connections to Lawrence, the nearby town where the young girl's lifeless body was found near a set of train tracks. Their investigation revealed that McClendon frequented various locations within Lawrence, including the Seventh-day Adventist Church on Salem Street. Additionally, he owned a van that resembled the one witnesses saw Melissa near on the day she disappeared. These findings shed light on McClendon's proximity to the murder location, prompting further inquiry into his potential involvement in the crime. In 1988, McClendon, then 41 years old, had gained a reputation for having an uncontrollable temper and displaying violent and aggressive behavior when under the influence of alcohol. He was known to frequently visit strip clubs, engaging in inappropriate and disrespectful activities towards women. Furthermore, he was involved in sexual relations with women in the back of his van, further tarnishing his image. These facts were previously presented in a court hearing by his brother, Strasnick. Mr. McClendon was represented by a court-appointed attorney, Mr. Fassold, during his trial following his arrest. However, during a hearing, a probation employee testified that Mr. McClendon did not meet the criteria for appointed counsel. During the hearing concerning Henry Fassold's motion to dismiss, McClendon's defense attorney, his own brother Strasnick, presented arguments against the motion. He provided evidence countering Fassold's claim that the DNA evidence collected was insufficient to support a first-degree murder indictment against McClendon. According to court documents, McClendon's lawyer highlighted that his client willingly provided a DNA sample to investigators during his initial interview with Lieutenant Peter Sherver of the Massachusetts State Police, which occurred in Alabama in 2021. Despite using a walker, McClendon managed to make his way into Salem's Superior Court on Tuesday, where he sat beside his attorney, Fassold. In April 2022, during a subsequent interview conducted by authorities, McClendon vehemently denied any involvement in Melissa's tragic demise. He maintained his innocence and even suggested that he may have been the victim of a meticulously orchestrated plot by inmates from the Massachusetts Department of Corrections, where he had previously worked. This statement not only attempted to shift blame, but also aimed to mislead the authorities. Strasnick emphasized that the DNA evidence collected from the crime scene matched the DNA profile of a male relative of McClendon, making it highly unlikely that it belonged to anyone else. Furthermore, he argued that the DNA evidence was just one piece of the puzzle, as there were other factors supporting the indictment against his brother. McClendon's attempts to absolve himself of responsibility did not end there. He proceeded to shift blame onto his own brother, Strasnick, displaying a treacherous betrayal and a willingness to sacrifice anyone to protect himself. His efforts to portray his own relatives as the mastermind behind the crime revealed a great deal about his disloyalty and lack of trustworthiness. He vehemently disputed the notion that his brother was factually innocent, presenting evidence of McClendon's erratic behavior leading up to and following the murder, arguing that these actions indicated guilt. Additionally, he highlighted McClendon's history of violence, making him a plausible suspect in the murder case. Fassold's statement suggested that the investigation focused on McClendon rather than his family members due to specific evidence available at the time, such as McClendon's left-handedness, potential connections to Lawrence, ownership of a van in 1988, lifestyle, and interactions with law enforcement during the investigation. However, this explanation seemed suspicious, potentially serving as an effort to absolve Mr. McClendon of any wrongdoing, and could be seen as a calculated and deceptive move. During the court proceedings, Judge Salem Tabbitt presided over a motion seeking to dismiss the case against the defendant, Mr. McClendon, who had been accused of first-degree murder. The judge attentively listened to the arguments presented in the motion and decided to carefully consider the matter before making a final decision. It is important to highlight that the charge of first-degree murder is an extremely serious offense, carrying the potential penalty of life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. Consequently, this case is being closely monitored by all parties involved, and the outcome of the upcoming hearing is expected to significantly impact the course of the trial. Despite Fassold's unsuccessful attempts to secure McClendon's release on a $50,000 bond, he remains detained without bond at Middleton Jail. Fassold also emphasized that there were no eyewitnesses to Tremblay's murder, and no evidence suggesting that McClendon had any connection or motive to harm her. Nevertheless, McClendon is currently held in protective custody within a cell at Middleton Jail. As part of this confinement, he is only allowed to leave his cell when accompanied by a guard. This precautionary measure has been implemented to ensure McClendon's safety and the safety of others, considering the high-profile nature of the case and the potential risks associated with his involvement. By keeping him in protective custody, authorities can closely monitor his movements and interactions, thereby preventing any potential harm or disturbances within the jail or beyond. According to Sherry Carrigman, a friend of Melissa who attended McClendon's arraignment, she was merely 10 years old when the crime took place. When she saw the defendant in court, she perceived him differently from what she had imagined. Melissa's family spokesperson, Danielle Root, conveyed that McClendon was described as an elderly and fragile individual. Shockingly, Melissa's lifeless body was discovered in a train yard in Lawrence on September 12, 1988, a day after she was reported missing. The family never anticipated that it would take over 3 decades for someone to be apprehended and brought to trial for Melissa's murder. Nevertheless, despite the lengthy delay, the family remains optimistic that the district attorney's office will exhibit the same level of commitment as the detectives who tirelessly pursue the suspect Marvin McClendon. According to a statement, Root stated that there had been a lot of emotion since the end of April when they were informed of the arrest, ranging from excitement to sadness to frustration and all over the place. They were thrilled to see the suspect in jail, but also very saddened that some of their family members, such as their aunt, grandfather, and others, were not alive to witness him facing justice. The statement went on to express gratitude to the police for their ongoing efforts throughout the years, and for the use of DNA technology that was not originally available to work the case. Root finished by saying that their family was looking forward to the case moving forward to the grand jury for indictment, and then on to the Superior Court to finally see justice served.